Hey guys, Jack Spirko here, and if you're used to my full-on rants on Facebook, this one's going to be a little bit more conservative because I want to have an actual intellectual conversation about this and have the kind of conversation that should be had in the world of vaccinations without a bunch of people shouting and screaming at each other with legitimate questions. I have count them, eight legitimate questions, and I'd like them to be answered by doctors. I'm not afraid of doctors challenging what I have to say. I do want to say this, though. What I'm going to give you here initially is 8 questions and supporting facts. In the famous words of Daniel Patrick Moynihan, we are all entitled to our own opinions. We are not entitled to our own facts. So if I get a fact wrong, you go ahead and feel free to correct me, but telling me, well, I went to medical school and you didn't, that is not an honest discussion. That's an ad hominem fallacy, and I really don't do that very well with other people. I like to stick to facts, logic, and reason, and the more educated you are, the more you should be able to do that. I want to point out here, I am not an anti-vaxxer. In fact, I bet, as much as I'm going to upset some of the people that are 100% establishment here, it's probably going to be the anti-vax people are going to be the most upset with me here for not taking a completely ridiculous and extreme stance that nobody should get vaccinated for anything. Because that's not what I believe at all. All right? So let's just kind of start out with this. And here, these are honest questions. And by the way, I've already actually had this conversation with quite a few medical doctors, and none of them have been able to disprove or change my opinion on any of the things that come out of this or assert that my facts are not accurate. So maybe a new doctor will show up and do that. Let's see. Number one, if vaccines are safe and effective, why did the government set up a special court to pay damages to victims of vaccine injuries that 100% protects pharmaceutical companies from any wrongdoing whatsoever? Why did that happen? I mean, you understand that court system would even protect a company manufacturing vaccines if they had some sort of illicit practice, some sort of safety issue where the vaccine became contaminated. It wasn't even a straight-up vaccine reaction. That if they accidentally put too much of something, they would still be insulated and protected 100%. By the way, if I'm an attorney and I take your case to that special vaccine court, I can only get what is called reasonable attorney fees. I cannot participate where some attorneys do I take 20% of the award that I get you or whatever. So it actually disincentivizes attorneys to represent people who definitely need representation in this situation. So I'm just going to say that there probably are vaccine injuries when a special vaccine court exists. Does that mean there's lots of them? Depends on how we define lots. We'll get to that in the last question. I'm just saying that they happen. So then my next question for medical doctors is, do vaccine injuries happen? And are some of them life-threatening or life-altering? One more time. Do vaccine injuries ever happen? And are some of them life-threatening or life-altering? I think we all know what the answer to that question is. And you can start screaming at the TV set or at the computer monitor or at your phone or whatever that they're rare. I didn't ask if they were rare or common. I asked if they occurred. This is a completely reasonable thing. You're asking me to inject my child with a substance. Is it not reasonable that I should know whether or not that could possibly cause them some sort of injury? And that doesn't mean that I'm not going to vaccinate my kids. It might mean that, hey, the particular thing you're vaccinating them for right now is less dangerous than the potential reaction. And this other thing you want to vaccinate them for, actually that thing is more likely to be a risk than a reaction. Don't I get the right to make that decision for my child? Honestly, if you don't think so, I don't know what country you think you live in, or the one that we should be living in anyway. So I'm just going to say that since vaccine injuries happen, we should maybe think about what we're doing to what child under any individual circumstance, which brings me to my next question. Why vaccinate every infant for hepatitis B when about 95% of infants have absolutely no risk whatsoever of contracting hepatitis B? We vaccinate newborn infants. We shove this chemical into their body and trigger their immune system for something that 95% of them have literally zero risk of contracting. As I said, I've had these conversations with medical doctors who can be reasonable and sit down and have a two-way conversation. I'm talking face-to-face here. And when I've done that and I've pushed that, what they all finally say is, well, there's a segment of the population, drug users and what have you, and really bad, impoverished places. And it's just easier to vaccinate everybody and just take care of it like that than to figure out whether or not a child has a risk. I'm sorry, and I'm back to my opinion here, but no, you don't get to make that decision for my infant when I know that my infant isn't going to be out using intravenous drugs or selling her body on the street, and neither is her mother. So I've broken out of these questions and stuff and giving you my opinion. But that's why I'm asking that question. You telling me that some crackhead on the other side of town actually puts her child at risk for Hep B, fine, then vaccinate her. You don't need to be vaccinating my infant for an ill. So now, back to this. Does the injuries ever occur? Absolutely, we know they occur. That's why special court exists. Is there any risk of my newborn baby getting Hep B if I don't have Hep B, her mom don't have Hep B, and we're not out selling ourselves on the street or doing IV drugs? No. Okay, then we don't need to take that risk at that early an age where we're not even sure what that child's development looks like yet. I know I'm just a hick duck farmer, but that seems to logically track for me. Doesn't it track for you? Okay, next. If vaccine injuries happen, and you give my child a vaccine, and my child has a vaccine injury reaction, and it happens to be on a day where you gave my child 5 different vaccines, how can you tell me which one they had a reaction to? Because we have reactions to vaccines all the time that are not in the number of serious reactions. They can be anything from a little red swelling to convulsions that don't last very long to getting really, really sick for a couple days and apparently a full recovery. I mean, if we look at that, we're talking tens or hundreds of thousands of reactions. So, I bring my child to you, you pump 5 vaccinations in them at one time, which is a thing. I looked it up. Again, I'd like to deal in facts. And my child has a rather serious reaction. They don't end up with Guillain-Barré. They don't end up with autism. They don't end up with nothing. They just have a really serious reaction. Don't you think it would be a good idea that as we completed their vaccination schedule, that I would know they specifically reacted to vaccine fill in the blank? You guys are supposed to deal in science, right? And this is the way science works. You have an experimental group and a control group. And when you test these vaccines, and they do get tested, for those of you who don't think they do get tested for safety, and they get tested for how effective they are. Don't think this is all a conspiracy to give your kid autism. That's retarded, okay? But when they're tested individually. They're tested individually. Now, you have a substance that in some people can cause a serious reaction. And you have another substance that in some people can cause a serious reaction. And you give them both at the same time. Can that reaction not now be greater than the sum of the two individually? Any doctor should know the answer to that question is absolutely yes. If you have 2 medications, just regular medications, that you have a reaction to, some sort of allergic reaction, let's say something like an allergic reaction to penicillin or something like that, and you have another medication you also have an allergic reaction to, and I give you those 2 substances combined, your reaction can be worse than either one of those 2. If we said each of them was a reaction out of a 1 to 10, reacted as a 2, the 2 can combine to be more than a 4 on the reaction scale, right? So doesn't it make sense then to limit how many of these vaccines are given at one time, even if they're given over a relatively short period of time, just so that if a reaction occurs, we can know, hey, you know what? They specifically had a reaction to this vaccine. They now have some immunity from that vaccine. Maybe we should hold off until they're a little older on that one thing right there and be just a little bit more conservative. My next question involves the vaulted herd immunity. Anytime somebody says something like, well, if vaccines are so safe and effective, why do people that are vaccinated get vaccines? Or get the illness they were vaccinated against? And at least the medical community is honest and says vaccines are safe and effective, but they're not 100% safe, and they're not 100% effective. About 3 out of every 100 people vaccinated for the measles can still get the measles. And generally, again, I want to be fair to modern medicine, when they do get the measles, they get a much less severe version of the measles. Okay, fine. But how can you say we have herd immunity? Because they say all these people that aren't getting vaccinated, it'd be a wild epidemic already if it wasn't for herd immunity. And if we let too many of them not get vaccinated, we'll lose our herd immunity. And then even with vaccinations, we'll have widespread outbreaks of disease. But we don't have herd immunity by your own facts. Hear me out. According to the CDC, to have herd immunity, you have to have a 95% vaccination rate. Now, here's the important part. And this is one where I've had, again, medical doctors sitting right next to me that mean well. When I point this out, I watch their shoulders fall as they admit this. So here you go. What they mean by 95% vaccination is not that you've ever had a shot, but that you are currently enjoying the benefits of conferred immunity of that vaccine. What does that mean? That means that when you got vaccinated for something when you were 5, and you never got vaccinated for it again because you're like my age in your mid-40s or you're older in your mid-50s, you probably no longer have immunity from that vaccine because many vaccines wear off. Every doctor knows this. I'm not making that up. I did not pull it out of my ass. And given the vast majority of Americans over the age of 40 have not had one of these vaccinations since they were either 5 or 12, how is it even possible to claim that we have a 95% vaccination rate? How is that possible if we mean actually have immunity from vaccination? And the answer is it isn't. There is no herd immunity in the United States. Now, I'll say a mitigating factor to this, to a degree, is many of those vaccines actually do confer some level, maybe not 100%, some level of a lifelong immunity. But some of them don't, and we know that. And yet we don't have runaway epidemics with them, and we probably have a vaccination rate when we talk about it being significantly effective, more in the 60 to 70% range. Well, that's not herd immunity according to you and the CDC. So how can you keep claiming herd immunity when we do not have it? Please explain. I'm not even saying you're wrong. I'm saying this is my take on it. You want to explain that away with logic, reason, and facts, and not, but I have a medical degree or I read a study, then I go ahead. I'm fine with that. My next question for you guys is, why the fear-mongering from the medical establishment about, we're going to have like people dying everywhere, and before vaccines everybody was in a wheelchair and what have you. Not the people that like, I get it. I get it with the complete, no, we should never vaccinate anybody. It's all a conspiracy to kill us and give us all. I get that. I'm not in that crowd. I'm really not part of that crew. I'm talking about the parents that say, hey, wait a minute. In 1980, we gave 9 shots by age 5. We never gave more than 2 at one time. And in 1980, we didn't have people falling over and dying of any of these diseases. We didn't have any real big super epidemics or pandemics going on. People weren't in wheelchairs from polio anymore. We didn't have any kind of massive measles outbreak. By the way, we had about the same number of cases that we do now. These giant, this is not opinion, but I'm breaking off the question for a second here. These giant outbreaks of measles, they're not that many. 300, 600, a country of 300 plus million, with a vaccine that has a failure rate 97 or not 3% of the time to confer full immunity is not many. It's not many at all. And some of those cases, not all of them, not even the majority, but some of those numbers are people that get measles immediately after receiving the vaccine. It's not a complete blown up runaway like everybody's going to start dying and dropping over to measles tomorrow because somebody in Louisiana didn't vaccinate their kid. Why the fear-mongering? When we went by the 80s vaccination schedule, we were still one of the healthiest countries ever existed in the world. And you have parents today that just want to be a little more conservative than this aggressive approach, again, which is 49 doses of 14 vaccines by the age of 6. Why fearmonger that? Why not just address the issue and be willing to admit that a conservative approach kind of does work? Because it did. Now, I know what you're going to say. You're going to say something like, well, it's better for your baby to build immunity. That's not what I'm asking you. I'm not asking you for the standard Rolodex textbook answer that's been written for you by the people that make the drugs, because vaccines are a drug, whether you want to admit that or not. I'm asking why fearmonger it when it can actually be addressed and handled with a modicum of respect for somebody asking a question. The next, I keep hearing about, well, there's 300 cases of measles last year. Okay, shouldn't you be just as concerned with the on average 3,500 to 4,000 vaccine injuries a year that occur in the United States? That's the actual number, without getting extreme, without every single person as a kid with a symptom of autism that blames vaccines for it. When we look at the legitimate numbers, it is about 3,500 to 4,000 cases where a parent takes their child to a physician, receives a vaccination, and has a severe enough reaction that it's deeply concerning. That child ends up really sick for a few days. Sometimes they have long-term consequences. Sometimes it doesn't appear that they have long-term consequences, but how do we know? One of the side effects of almost every vaccination out there, again, I'm back to fact, you can go look up the vaccine insert yourself and read it, is encephalitis. For those that don't know what that is, that's swelling of the brain. If the brain swells for 3 days, and the child has serious reactions to it, but the swelling goes down, how can you tell me that had no long-term impact on my child's mental development? Can you really look me in the face and tell me that? Now, doctors do it all the time because they really believe in what they're doing. And they're not bad people. They're not part of some conspiracy cabal to lie to you. They just have been trained and taught, and they've gone through hell to become what they are. And they only have so much time a day. That's why doctors, sometimes they walk backwards into an exam room, talk to you for 5 minutes, and walk backwards out of it. Right? Because they're trying to do as much as they can in a day, and it's hard, and I appreciate them for it. But yeah, like, shouldn't you be, if you are going to have, let's say you have a standard family practice, about 3 nurses that do immunizations and 1 doctor, and you're going to be giving tens and thousands of vaccinations a year, shouldn't you be just as concerned with the 3,500 to 4,000 vaccine injuries that we do know occur as 300 cases of measles, when the majority of the cases of measles are extremely mild, and the 1 case of brain swelling from the measles or whatever is much less likely in the total number than a serious reaction to a vaccine injury, to a vaccine injury? Shouldn't you care about that? Shouldn't that be just as important to you? I'm not saying not to vaccinate, but like, can you really sit here and look people in the face and tell them there's a big problem because 300 people or 400 people get measles, but there's not a problem with 3,500 to 4,000 people having a serious reaction to this? And again, you can't say it doesn't happen. We know it happens. But let's just look at it from a bit of logic here. There are people out there that if I took a peanut, mashed it up, and rubbed it on their lips, they could go into anaphylactic shock and die. Okay? Because they reacted to a peanut. That doesn't mean we should ban peanuts, though some people apparently do think it means we should ban them from public places or schools instead of teaching a child not to eat a peanut. But, I mean, if a peanut can kill you, a pharmaceutical can kill you. And the difference is, when I inject that into your body, I can't get it out. I can't get it out. You have a kid in your office and you give them an injection, they start having a reaction to it, all you can do is treat the symptoms. You can't take it out. So shouldn't you be a little bit more concerned? Shouldn't you think a little bit more about this? And maybe be a little bit more conservative? That's all I'm saying. Lastly, on that note, if vaccinations are so important, if you medical doctors, you really think that vaccinations are one of the most important health issues that we have today, why do you mock, browbeat, accuse, look down on, mock parents that want to be more conservative? I'm not saying parents that don't want to vaccinate at all. Again, I don't actually think that's a smart course of action. I really don't. But when a parent comes to you and says, well, what I would like to do, instead of you giving them 5 injections on this visit, I'd like you to give them 1. I'd like to come back next month and you can give them another one. And you can come back and I understand this one is 3-in-1 and that's the only way it's available. So let's not do it with these other 2 and we'll do that one then. Why don't you just work with them? I mean, you get to bill more, you get more office visits. Why the, mocking them, calling them anti-science, saying that, why keep bringing up Andrew Wakefield in this? Nothing I said today has a damn thing to do with Andrew Wakefield. You can't make one guy your boogeyman and think that answers every argument. Why can't you simply acknowledge these risks are real, and if someone wants to be more conservative, I would rather their child get the vaccinations and a more conservative approach than piss them off, have them leave, and not get them at all. Now, I'm going to tell you, now I'm going to switch 100% to opinion here. I'm going to tell you why I think doctors take this approach and why most policymakers take this approach. I think that they believe everything I just said is true. In spite of it, they really think the alternative is worse. That if they admit anything at all about potential risks of vaccines, and people really start to take a different approach to this, that the whole world will go back to the way it was, in 1850, and people will be dropping over, dying everywhere. Well, I have a message for you guys. If you keep taking this stonewall approach, that every single person that questions anything at any time is some kind of quack, that's more likely to be what you're going to get. Because sooner or later in this day and age, people are going to figure out that everything I just said is true. And then they're going to figure out that they can't trust you. And when they figure out that they can't trust you, even though it's not that you're not a trustworthy person, it's that you're such a part of the system that you just say what the system says to say. And since they can't trust you, they won't listen to you at all. It's like when you get your microphone too close to your amplifier and you get a feedback loop where it goes like that. That's where you're headed. It's time for us actually to look at this issue and understand that these drug companies are profiting billions and billions and billions of dollars off of this. And there probably is a safer approach to vaccinations for our children, and that we are being misled. That doesn't mean vaccines are bad in and of themselves. It doesn't mean that they don't help at all. It does mean that people should have the freedom in a country like the frickin' United States of America to ask questions without being mocked for them. And when they present facts, to have those facts addressed rather than being attacked with an ad hominem fallacy. So go ahead, doctors. Answer me. Make your own video. Comment below. I'm ready. I got them for you one more time. If vaccines are safe and effective, why did the government set up a special court to pay damages to parents of children who have vaccine injuries that 100% protects the drug companies from any liability? By the way, it 100% protects you too. Even if that kid has a reaction and you tell that mother it's not a reaction and that kid dies, it 100% protects you. Why do you need that if there are no reactions? So, question number 2, do vaccine injuries happen? And are some of them severe and life-threatening? We all know the answer is yes. You want to prove it's not? Go ahead. Prove that it doesn't happen. Prove that negative. You should be able to, but I think we'll be able to show you people where it did. Next, why vaccinate infants for Hep B when 95% have no risk of the illness? If vaccine injuries happen and my child has a reaction on a day you gave them 5 in one day, how can you tell me which one they reacted to? That's my most important question. That's the one I most want a doctor to answer for me. You give my kid 5 injections in one day, and I know they're not actual individual injections. You give 5 substances in one day. They have a severe reaction. How do you tell me which one they reacted to? Go ahead. Love to hear the answer to that. How can you claim herd immunity when, according to CDC statistics, we do not have herd immunity because people do not get booster shots when they're no longer children, except in very, very rare individuals that are complete conformists. Why the fear-mongering when a parent wants to be more conservative, given that none of the horrors brought up were occurring in the 70s and 80s with a far more conservative approach to vaccines. Again, 9 shots and never more than 2 at one time versus 49 doses of 14 vaccines by the age of 6 today. Why fear-monger that? Should you not be just as concerned about 3,500 to 4,000 reactions as you are of 300 cases of measles? And if vaccination is so important, why won't you simply work with parents who want to be more conservative yet do want to complete the majority of the vaccine schedule? Go ahead and look forward to your answers. And if you just start talking to me like I'm stupid and telling me I don't know what I'm saying instead of responding to the actual questions, yeah, I'm going to delete and ban your ass. I am here for a legitimate intellectual discussion on this issue. Asshats need not apply.